brief PowerPoint presentation from each of the panelists, and then we'll go through and I will ask the panelists a series of questions about the market and what advice they will be giving to tenants, and then open up the floor to all the participants. So a big thank you to all the participants for joining today, and I hope we have a useful and productive session for all the BCCT members. So at this stage, I'll shut up and hand over straight away to Robert.
Thank you, James. Thank you, everyone. A little introduction on why I'll start my clock for 5 minutes. What initiated the topic of today's discussion was I had, following from one of James' many market commentaries via LinkedIn on the office market, one of our industry friends and associates at another company that's conspicuously not joining us today, commented that he thought the outlook for the office market was very rosy and was on a very strong upward trend. I think that's what he was saying. And I thought to the contrary, that the market was perhaps looking as if we were going into an oversupply situation. And in fact, rents could be looking to start going down rather than up over the short to medium term. And hopefully everyone can see my screen now. And I thought that this is an interesting topic because it's been quite a long time since we've had a turbulent market environment of either the 97 period in particular, which is so long ago now that there's little point in really taking this topic from then. So I've taken up my graph, our data from 2007. And before I go into the numbers as we see them, I want to point out that for offices rather than the retail market, for the office market, you can't really see when office space is empty. It's not particularly visible except at night when the lights are not turned on, perhaps, but it's not visible to the public eye. Whereas for retail, we can tangibly see empty shops everywhere, not just on the high street, but in the most prime, the most significant shopping centres. There are a lot of closed shops. There's a lot of for rent signs. For the office market, we can't really see it. So the depth of the problem, if there is one, is largely unnoticed at this point in time. So what we're just displaying here from our side is just the prime grade A office space, which is a lot less than the overall market. So from the period of 2007, we're at approximately 1 million square meters of what we define as prime grade A space. That doesn't change significantly as we rifle through these years. It's starting to go up. But what is happening during this period, from our observation, is that the residential market in Bangkok is absolutely booming. We can see a lot of new launches from the major developers and new developers, second-tier developers coming through. Values for residential are doubling, tripling as we go through this even further. But the office market is stagnant. And even from 2007 to 2013, what's considered a grade A building, be it All Seasons Place, 990 Ramafort, Uchuliang buildings, these are the best of the grade A buildings, but they're all from the mid-90s. Not a lot was happening during this period. Developers were overlooking the space for whatever reason. And then the residential market continues to boom. It continues to boom. We can rifle through this. 1 million is slowly increasing. We're getting into the danger zone of COVID-19 appearing in 2020. And then something interesting happens this year. The market has doubled in size for grade A. It's gone from 1 million to nearly 2 million square meters of space. That's taken 15 years to get to that point in time, which is a long time. And now we go into what we can see coming in the future, and we have a lot of surety over what we can see coming because it's being built. We can see it out the window, or we're very aware that it's on the cusp of being completed. And the amount of supply is just never ending. Just move that so I can see it. There's a lot of it all the way through 2026, where what took 15 years from 2007 to 2021 to add another 1 million square meters of prime grade A. It takes a mere 5 years for another 1 million square meters of prime grade A to come online. We've seen, if we look at the the occupancy chart. Occupancy has been pretty good. We certainly peaked at around 2019. It's been on a downward trend. Clearly, the COVID-19 factor was the black swan event. That is something that's baked into the situation now. But we held at Savills, we held a seminar in June 2019 where I was speculating that the market was going to have a problem anyway. And I stand firm by that. The market was going to have a problem anyway. Due to the vast volume of new supply, they're generally speaking lackluster amount of new demand, and that rents would start to fall. And I think this last table here shows that rents have been falling moderately, but we would predict they're going to slip even further. I'm down to my last few seconds in terms of 5 minutes, so I'll be very brief. Our prediction at Savills for where we see the market is that there will be a hierarchy of grade A buildings will emerge. There'll be grade A and there'll be grade A plus, let's say. Grade A plus will encompass, probably be centered around 2 developments in particular, one Bangkok, Central Park. They're both proper prime rather than being up on Brahma 9, without looking to insult you there, Marcus. In the downtown, great connections in every respect. I would suspect that those buildings may well continue to see their rentals accelerate into this period because they offer things that people really want, and we'll start to see a deceleration, stagnation, certainly in traditional grade A, and I would suspect a considerable decline in the grade B sector. Okay, so if I finish up, James, at that point, exactly 6 minutes.
That's great. Thank you, Robert.
You're welcome.
Switch over now to Marcus. See what your views are.
Okay, here we are. So yeah, the picture could tell 1,000 words. I mean, it's certainly a gloomy outlook, I think, when you start to look at the influx of new supply. Just as I sort of go and have a look at this briefly, it's working. So I think just look at what's going on in the office market, and I just compare briefly with what's been going on, because I think one of the key things to understand is that I think the relationship and the corporate relationship with offices has changed a lot. So we now see corporates are using the office as a strategic tool to attract and retain talent. And this has resulted, and certainly pre-pandemic, in a flight to quality. We can see that back in 2011, occupancy rates in grade A grew despite all the new supply being in grade A and grade B, to be the most occupied sector. But of course that has changed, and tenants have been looking to select better workplaces, and they're looking for a better environment. But we look at the situation going forward. We acknowledge that we're in a period of oversupply, and we're heading into oversupply, where we're looking at a situation where we're seeing a fall in occupancy, and yet rents are still only just beginning to drop. That full impact has not been felt just yet. The oversupply, of course, I mean, we're looking at something like 1.83 million over the next 6 years. I don't need to repeat that. Our forecasts are somewhat similar. We've got some different scenarios. I mean, we think that most likely we're going to be looking at a scenario whereby recovery in demand is somewhat tepid. We might see net absorption, something in the region of about, mild growth, maybe like 3.5% per annum, but not so much, because as again, the way in which we work and the way in which we use the office is changing a lot. What the customer and what the tenant wants now has become so much more important. We're also seeing, certainly in many parts of the world, increase in demand in decentralized locations like Ramenai, where we are, and we're seeing people looking to adopt more flexible working solutions and increase importance on things like health, safety, and well-being. But of course, the big change that is happening has been this great sort of work from home experiment, which we've all experienced over this pandemic. And as people adopting remote work and hybrid work, we're seeing opportunities for tenants to reduce their space requirement, and as they incorporate sort of hybrid work models to different and varying degrees, and what works for one person doesn't work for another. But that does mean that tenants might be able to use less space. Therefore, with lots of new options available, they will also be able to potentially maintain the budget roughly of what they're looking at, and perhaps even go into better quality properties. And I think that's the outlook and what we're going through. We can take more questions at the end.
Okay, thank you, Marcus. And finally, on the PowerPoints, we're trying to keep PowerPoints to a minimum today. Rungrat, if you could, I could hand over to you for your 5 minutes.
Yeah. Okay, can you see my screen? Can you?
Yeah, all good. Please go ahead.
Okay, all good. Thank you, Marcus, and thank you, Robert. You two have already still my roles. You mentioned a lot on the office market already. So what I like to highlight here is this is the first time we have seen negative take-up year since Tom Yum Goong crisis in year 1997. And there was a minimal movement in rental rate in Bangkok office market. This is the only grade A CBD average rent decrease from 1,100 to 1,060 baht per square meter per month. If we look to another slide, which you can see that the overall market performance suffered from negative take-up. And this is the third time of net negative take-up this year. Can you see that?
No, slide's not moving, Rungrat.
Oh.
There you go. It's okay. Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm just like to emphasize is that there will be most of the return space from grade B in CBD sector where the tenants have affected from their financial standpoint because of COVID-19 pandemic. And this quarter, we see more grade A CBD return their space back to the tenant, to the landlord as COVID-19 prolonged. But the other sector remain unchanged for the rental. I like to share this slide, which I think probably most of us should know. What are the moving forward? What are the future office trends? To make everyone easily understanding, I just put the word star. So S is stand for sustainability. You see that location is no longer everything. Building wellness for tenant is very important, as nowadays to retain talent, employee-centric will be more emphasized. And therefore, formulate this sustainability like LEED and WELL are very important. T, technologies. Apart from all the sensor and like access control, facial recognition, I believe applications like something that we use between landlord and occupier, these also enhance tenant experience. Okay, and next one is A, amenities. We are not talking only about the coffee shop, convenience store, or the fitness, but this time we should also emphasize on flexible space, because this kind of space also support the growth needs of your clients, or even buildings provide plug and play, or even space or leisure facilities. Last one, resilient. I think landlords should also be very flexible in terms of terms and conditions in the lease, and even offering the very attractive package. So my keywords for this slide is star. So maybe you guys can remember this and can be used for future development for new building. And that's it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Rungrat.
Yeah.
And what I'm going to do now is go through a series of questions. I try to anticipate the questions that people might want to ask, and then what will be useful for the BCCT chamber members. So going forward, what kind of work pattern do we think we're going to have? And I'll ask Robert maybe to answer this first, and everybody else could chime in afterwards. We got work from home, hybrid, partly work from home, partly at the office, or full return to the office. What do you think, Robert, is going to happen in Bangkok?
How long have I got to answer this? I think ultimately there'll be a full work from home. I know that's not popular opinion in terms of the industry trend globally right now. I think work from home has been very, has been very useful, necessary. The technology has existed to make it possible when it was exactly needed. My take on it is from as a person who operates a business, that if one in any field, if one of your competitors switches to everybody gets back to the office and they start to perform well for whatever dynamic, for whatever purpose, that'll very quickly lead to the trend swinging back. And I think if to pick up on something Mark has said to me a year ago, maybe in a different context, is that the hot desking, the trends that we see around having lockers and people working, sharing desks and that sort of thing, derives from perhaps New York, from a period where rents were 10, 15, 20 times higher than Bangkok, where it's really huge cost on your balance sheet. We don't have that here, especially if rents are collapsing to levels considerably below where they are today. Well, under that equation, the cost of an office space, the cost of each person having their own sense of space, sense of belonging, may override the need to follow a trend which is important for markets like Hong Kong and New York. So my personal opinion is that we'll perhaps be swinging towards, in the medium to longer term, people getting back to the office in a more traditional manner in this market. Elsewhere, they'll be following the more contemporary workplace trends because they have to. They make perfect sense. For some companies here, that will continue to make perfect sense. So I think we'll have a hybrid going into perhaps something more traditional.
Okay, and Marcus and Rungrat, do you have an opinion on work from home, hybrid, full return? What do you see companies thinking at the moment across the range from large Thai corporates, MNCs? What do you see? Maybe Marcus, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, well, we're seeing a range. So I think lots of different companies are tackling it in different ways, and I think that this current situation is really highlighted how we are using our office. So whilst a lot of people are very comfortable working from home, but I mean that's just not always possible in every circumstance, and it doesn't really give you the benefits of physical interaction. When you bump into someone in the office by the water cooler, to have that sort of offhand sort of conversation, being able to have that sort of productivity which you can't replicate at home. So I think that we're definitely seeing a lot of people adopting a more hybrid model. We're seeing something like, a large proportion of our clients are saying, oh, we'll have 2 or 3 days at home, or maybe only sales staff or certain different client-facing functions who are not necessarily in the office all the time anyway. So why do they need a full-time desk? And if you're going to have that type of arrangement, and you're not going to be in the office every day, then the traditional one desk per person doesn't work anymore. You then need to have a different solution, which is provided by what we're looking at now, like activity-based work styles or hot desking, as it was called. And I think that's becoming increasingly the model. So I think we'll see mostly a more of a hybrid work environment going forward, as opposed to full-time back or full-time at home.
Right.
Rungrat, what have you got anything to add to that?
Yes. Very similar to mine. From our survey, because CBRE, we have done survey every quarter, and from my experience dealing with the tenants, hybrid would be the work pattern, James. even from now or even COVID is over. But the degree of the hybrid depends a lot on nature of companies and its business, as well as the technical tools. We have seen advantages and also gaps when we work at home. You see, we have some barrier when we mom with the small kids. You know, this kind of things. Of course, there will be some drawbacks. But again, the fact that the corporate always looking for the cost effectiveness and also the staff, they want to work-life balance, just like Marcus mentioned earlier. I think hybrid should be the answer. But from the survey, they also mentioned about most Asian companies, they do not, you know, they find it's hard, Jim, to implement a hybrid model. Unlike our survey for Western company, they are more flexible on this and whether they believe are based on cultural difference.
Okay.
There is no one size fit for all solution, James, for this, and this will be a mixed response for every market.
Okay, that's interesting. So my next question is probably the toughest one. So I'll give it to Marcus because he's haircut. And that's the question is, we all of you have given us the supply predictions, and everything that seems to be under construction is still going ahead. The hard one is to judge what's going to happen to demand, and I guess that's driven by the economy, which at the moment, Rungrat, you said demand is negative, and then what's going to happen on this transition. What does hybrid mean? Does it mean that we take less space altogether? And so those two factors of demand, the hardest question is what's going to happen on rents going forward, Marcus? And will every building and every location be equally affected?
Okay, yeah, I think that last bit is a nuance, which is a lot of times gets overlooked. I do think we're going to see, we're already seeing a fall in demand. And I think that as more and more companies adopt this hybrid work model, they realize they don't need to use the full amount of space. You know, we've been having companies with reducing space requirements by 20–30%, without very limited impact on how you know, they operate every day, because we're able to incorporate this hybrid work model. So I think that's the trend going forward. It used to be in the past that hybrid work and hot desking, all those trends you'd see in America and elsewhere in the world would never ever reach Thailand. That's kind of the general assumption. But we're seeing these trends being adopted much more rapidly. And we're seeing that those sort of work models being adopted by firms you wouldn't think so, like, you know, very traditional Thai sort of insurance companies. We're seeing that from Thai real estate developers who are adopting activity-based work and, you know, very much a more sort of collaborative work culture, which is something that we haven't really sort of seen much before. And I think that's a trend which is going to continue. Of course, you know, we've got falling demand and a huge amount of increase in supply, and that's going to put pressure on rents. But that doesn't mean that it's going to be all losers from all the new office buildings in town. I think those that can appeal to this new work style provides lots of amenities and a much more rich and pleasant working environment for their people, because that's really what it's all about nowadays. It's about the people. I think the office is used as a way to attract talent and retain talent. It can be a differentiator in a tough labour market, and I think that's what we're going to see. And of course, we're going to see rents fall, but there's definitely going to be winners and losers.
Okay, so Marcus, to summarise, you think we've got falling demand accelerated by hybrid working, significant increase in supply, but maybe the best buildings can attract tenants. But Rungrat, maybe can these buildings, what rents do you think they'll be getting? That's the hardest question. I don't know if you, it's the $1 billion question as to where do we think rents are going to go?
Yeah, Jim, I would say rent will fall, Jim, but the degree will be different. It is very hard to put percentage on it, as we do not know the level of demand. And it is clear that the rent is going to go down, but we do not know whether it's going to drop how many percent. But we can say that it's not going to be like in 1997, that's where the rent dropped like 50% in the last market shock. Remember, James, the rent fell roughly 50% and vacancy is around 40%. And for this time, I don't think the rent will go down up to 40%, but it would be around, let's say, 15 to 20% by the year 2023 to 24. But
Okay,
remember,
but each building is different from what you and Marcus are saying.
Yes, each sector will be affected differently, but some sector will be affected more than the others.
And Robert, maybe what do you think, Robert? You've got the more, let's say, maybe pessimistic attitude towards the market, which you've been very consistent on.
I learned that from you, James. I think I'm pleased that people have brought up the 97 period and they've mentioned Rung Rat, in particular 50% reductions in rent and 40% vacancy. And I was discussing this with a colleague yesterday and I referenced the Soak Road where they had rents of about 200 baht a square meter. And at one point, I remember a rent of 180 baht a square meter, and it those days are long gone. But I would put it another way. There's a few observations. If a building is completed and sitting empty, of which there are quite a few in the market today, generating no rental income, well, that rent is zero. It's not 600, 700, 800 baht, it's zero. How long will they leave it at zero? And I think the difference between the Bangkok market and most other markets, certainly every market I'm familiar with, is that landlords here, it seems, will be happy to leave a building empty, generating no income, not month upon month, but year upon year, rather than reduce the rent at all. I find that very odd, and it distorts the market is not finding its natural level. We're not getting price discovery on rental rates. I would also observe that there's somebody drilling on the floor above me. If you can hear a funny noise, if not, good. Observe that there are buildings that came on that period in my presentation from 2007 up to 2021, or let's say 2019. There are grade A buildings that came online in that period ahead of the curve when there had been this decade gap of new supply. Buildings, and I shouldn't name them, but they're obvious what buildings these are. The buildings that are not in traditional prime recognized Wireless Road type, Saffron Road even type location. But they've had extraordinary high rental rates, well surpassing 1,000 baht per square meter. I would suggest that they're going to but potentially suffer the most over the course of the next cycle of 3 and 6 years, being the 3-year lease pattern, as people didn't really want to be in those slightly less convenient locations, not on the BTS. But they're happy to pay 1,500 baht a square meter to be in one Bangkok. So I think we may see the leveling up will come quite quickly in those locations, but I really think it's going to be the 20-year-old supply of grade A buildings where we'll see some real fallout. But I do think there will be this hierarchy of grade A that will present itself. And I don't think there will dip much, if anything. And I guess the real question is, are we going to see 2,000 baht a square meter during our tenure in this industry? Or is that now being taken away from us? I guess we peaked at about 1,500. And James, I would throw something back to a comment you made pre-LinkedIn, which I was probably at a chamber function or a Christmas party 20 years ago. You referenced the year before I arrived in 1992. The rent at the Tanya Plaza office building was something like 830 baht a square meter. And the average rent when I was trading in, let's say, 1994, 1995, was about 550 baht a square meter. And the lofty highs of 830 seemed impossible, and that was never going to happen again. Well, it took a very, very long time for us to get back to 830 baht a square meter. And I think wherever we are headed in this current downtrend, which we all clearly uniformly agree is going to happen, I think it's going to be a long time before we see an average rent much above 1,000 baht a square meter again.
Okay, very interesting. So if I summarize, we all agree there's downward pressure on rents, and there's a general agreement it's going to affect different buildings at different locations. A lot of Bangkok stock is, the grade A stock, labeled grade A, is now more than 20 years old. So maybe it looks quite dated compared to the new better technology, better specification buildings coming on. So the answer that I'm seem to be getting is you expect a far greater range in rents. So the best buildings in the market, well, they'll get the top rents. What those top rents are, we don't quite know. But the older buildings or grade B buildings in less attractive locations may be obsolete, some of them. Right, they may be very, very difficult for them to find space. Is that a reasonable summary?
Yeah, I think it's the
Obsolete's a
old-
mean word, but I think leaning that way, yeah. So Marcus, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, Rob. Yeah, I think what was it? Something like more than 50-60% of the office buildings in Bangkok are more than like 30 years old now.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, if you're an accountant, 30 years is the end of your useful life for a building. So I think, you know, we're getting to the point now where I think older buildings, this goes on to, you know, advising on landlords is really, if you've got an older building that's 30 years old, really need to start to reconsider, start to consider investment and improving utilities to be able to continue to compete.
Right, and that moves on to my next question. I've forgotten the order we were doing it, so I apologise for that. So, my next question is, what advice would you give to landlords? Firstly, of existing buildings, and secondly, for the buildings under construction. And I think, whose turn is it now? I guess it's Rungrat's turn.
Right? Yes, I can do. Right, because I most of my times I have to support and give new opportunity to my existing landlord and also the newer buildings under construction. So for my advice for existing landlord is the only way to return tenant is, you know, you have to be very competitive on the rent. Landlords should also upgrade their buildings in terms of service and quality. And for the newer buildings like under construction, I think to secure the anchor tenants as soon as possible is the best strategy. The market is not going to get better quickly, so we don't feel proud about your building. Fill the building first. I think these are the key, and both of them should be realistic and flexible, and also be very proactive in marketing and also the rent being offered. I just want to straight to the point. Yeah.
Okay, Robert and Marcus, do you have anything to add to that in terms of advice to landlords?
Just that I hope my landlord's listening as we're going through our lease renewal right now, and it's proving reasonably difficult. Yeah, my advice would be to for a landlord, if they have good existing tenants, if they're in the traditional legacy grade A buildings, is watch out, because your tenants are looking independently, or there's a number of agents definitely looking to move them to the more prestigious new supply coming up. The tenants have to be considering those moves to those more glamorous, more convenient, more desirable buildings. They have to be. So as a landlord, get in quick, reduce the rent now. Reduce the rent. If their lease is expiring in a year's time, break the lease now. Give them rent relief now to start a new lease. Don't waste time on this. Rungrat's right. Don't forget about losing face. Forget your pride. You'll lose more face if the building empties out. If your anchor tenant leaves, if you have an anchor 1, anchor 2 tenant in your building, the worst thing that could possibly happen in the short to medium to long term is if those companies leave, because they're not replaceable at this point in time. So this market has barely moved an inch in terms of rents coming down so far. It's been almost imperceptible. It could happen as quickly as that. It won't take much for a few significant players on the tenancy side to make that move. Could we be seeing 6 months to a year or more rent-free coming back to the market? I think yes, definitely. So existing landlords, be warned. But it's not going to be a landlord-friendly market. There are a lot more tenants than there are landlords in this marketplace, by the tune of thousands. And more people want the rent to go down than they want the rent to stay as it is or go up. Okay, Marcus.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, I echo what everyone else says. I think advising landlords, I'd say that it's a lot more costly to find a new tenant than it is to keep one. So, you know, you've got to look after your existing tenants well. and that includes being flexible on your terms. And if you're a new landlord or you've got a new building coming out, you've got to really consider, your competition and where you stand in the workplace. You've got to make yourself a really attractive option. You have to stand out from the crowd somehow, some way. That's not only purely on cost, but I think you also need to consider the experience and what you're able to offer the tenant beyond, just a place to work. So there's a lot to that.
That sort of leads on to my follow-up question. You're a landlord of an old building, and so you said, A, I must drop the rent, B, I've got to improve the experience. How can I improve the experience on an old building with a sort of antiquated air conditioning system, slow lifts, windows where I can hear the train every time it goes past? And at the rents we're looking at, is it economically, what can they do? Maybe Robert, have you got an opinion to kick off with that one?
First observation, appoint Savills to run your property management. That always helps. Everyone said it's very difficult. If you have an existing building, there is some truth on the property management side. If you're self-managing, which many of these landlords do, perhaps because they're a family business and whatever purposes they have chosen to self-manage, that is rarely better than using Knight Frank, CBRE, or Savills, for instance. At least consider that as an option. Look at the retail coffee shops. There's nothing special in the coffee shop, but they haven't all made the effort to get coffee shops in. Re-look at the coffee shop environment. Get that collaborative experience at least as an option in your ground floor space. Make an effort. Look at the lobby as it utilizes it an empty space. Perhaps spend some money with great interior designers to reform that environment. Car parking, we haven't talked about car parking. I think whilst there's a trend that a lot of people have the opinion that there'll be less people driving and car parking will be less important, I don't follow that chain of thought. I think people like to drive. I think in this country, this market, we should expect more cars on the road, irrespective of whatever happens with electric versus gasoline. Look at the car parking ratios. Does everyone need to have a fixed space? There are better ways to organize car park so that you can get people in. There's nothing more annoying than driving through level after level after level of reserved parking that is often just an orange cone because the person never comes in. Look at that. If you can park, you can live with all sorts of other inconveniences and deficiencies if you can park your car conveniently. Almost every building could do something to improve their user experience and interface, but from what I can see, they're not really looking at it. And where we've offered ideas or suggestions, the reception so far is not there. We perhaps need to get a flavour of 1998's vacancy to wake people up to changing their attitudes towards tenants.
And Rungra and Marcus, do you have any opinion on what practically the landlord of an older building can do to make the experience more attractive?
Right. I think what Robert have mentioned has covered majority of the points already. But apart from user experience, I think since I like to talk about more abstract things like the air qualities, all these indoor aircon. The landlord should also try to implement these elements so that the occupier who are in the building will also give them the feeling that, okay, this is a good grade of building, although we don't have LEED or don't have well, but the air quality, that is become the very key, one of the key considerations, since we have PM 2.5 or we have COVID situation. I think that is something that we should also looking at that.
Okay, and Marcus, anything to add?
Yeah, it's going to cost money, right? And so I think that people are going to I think they need to upgrade their office buildings. Yeah, I think that in order to compete, if you're going to bring in new amenities, you're going to improve those lifts, you're going to change those car parking systems. Maybe you start to, dedicate space for collaborative work or something along those lines, town hall spaces or something like that. But that's going to cost money. And if you're going to be investing in making your property more sustainable and more attractive, I think this is going to be a really important factor in people's decision making in the years to come. ESG has become a really important element of how companies are actually having to choose their space elsewhere, and that's really come into the focus in the last year or so. And if you're going to be investing in new sort of environmental systems or rainwater capture or areas where you can improve energy efficiency, then I think there's also sort of green or sustainability linked finance options which are available to developers, and I think they really need to start considering to explore that, because 30 years is the end of your building's useful life, and if you don't start to reinvest in it now, then that will be the end of its life.
Thank you. Well, moving on to the next slide is really, I think, the reason that many people joined today. We got 68 participants in the meeting, which is, I think, nearly a record for our property and infrastructure webinars this year, is what advice have you got for tenants? What should they do? If my lease is expiring next year, what do I do? Maybe, I think it's Robert's turn to kick off on this one. You get first dibs at this one.
It's an irritating time in a way, because it's slightly too early. If your lease is due for expiry or renewal in the next 3 to 6 months, I'm finding the landlords are uniformly in denial and not receptive to talking beyond maybe 3 to 5% reductions when as a tenant you're looking at a 3 to 6 year commitment. We're thinking more like 15 to 20%, because that's just how it feels. There's no science to back that up. We need collective support in the community, a bit more data hitting the property press to support the direction this market needs to be going and where it's ultimately eventually headed. Use an agent, use the agent of your choice to work for you. There is comparable data in the marketplace, what other people have achieved, but we need more light shone on what other people have achieved. There's a huge lack of transparency in the marketplace. As agents, we don't communicate with each other for rental data comparisons, which is very frustrating. And the data is not on public record, so what's achieved is in the dark. As I say, use an agent without wanting to be too annoying. Use an agent that doesn't represent the landlords, perhaps. Try and ask that question: do you represent landlords, or are you tenant representative only? Not just what you're doing now because it's convenient for you. That would help. The more we can develop some maturity into the operating mechanism of the brokerage community at a time when everyone is looking to save money on their occupancy costs, that would be very beneficial. Okay.
So as I understand it, it's still tough at the moment, right, for tenants?
Well, I think it is. I mean, we're working with quite a few of our corporate clients to downsize their space or break their lease, or everything in that way inclined. And we're finding the landlords are being pretty much uncooperative. They don't have to, is their opinion. The lease says you stay, you pay. There's no provision for terminating early or downsizing. Lots of words of sympathy, but not much substance coming with it. I think they would rather ride out stay firm and ride the lease out. Where I see the opportunity is for one of these buildings, which is broadly empty, is to basically say, yeah, we're taking 50% off the rent, or it's a year's rent free, or whatever it happens to be. Somebody will make a jump on this market and drag out. It will create some unexpected opportunities, which will swiftly lead to the change in course of this marketplace.
There's a couple of movers on discounting that will suddenly change, that more likely to change the course of the market. And Marcus, what have you got to add on that one? For what should I do as a tenant? This is what our members, the BCCT members, want to know.
Yeah, it's about choice, making sure you're well informed, that you know all of the options that are available to you. But also, I'd ask you to look at your operation and your organisation. How are you going to work? Does everybody need their own desk? Whilst landlords at the moment still, can be pretty intransigent on negotiations in some cases. We can also start to look at how we're using our office space. Can we use less? If we can reduce our space by 20%, then our rental our budget also falls by the corresponding amount. So there's ways in which we can actually reduce our occupancy costs, and if that then presents an opportunity potentially to even look at better buildings, especially as the market gives us more and more options in the years to come.
So what you're saying is, if you reduce the amount of space, then you can, without altering your overall budget, you can pay maybe more per square meter, get a better building, and upgrade, providing you go to agile or activity-based working or whatever the latest buzzword is. But,
Right.
what do you think? Have you got anything to add to?
Right. I just like to add that, James, we see more movement, more tenants will move to agile workspace, which means they will require less space, like you said, and pay more per square meter, as they will need good quality buildings. But the key question, James, is how many companies will be willing to pay significantly higher rent to get top quality premises, which depends on the rent gap between new grade A and older grade A and grade B buildings. If the premium for the best quality buildings is significantly higher than older building, it may be difficult for them to get approved from the increased rental budget. So if I'm paying at this amount and I use less space for 20%, of course, certainly I will use the same amount and getting the better building, but the rental could be higher, like 20%. Yeah.
Okay, so it very much depends what the premium is. It all comes into the maths.
Yes.
So that's still, it still seems doubtful in this market that tenants will receive permission to spend more money than they're spending at the moment.
Yeah.
So if they can maintain a budget, then they can move and upgrade by reducing space, but it's going to be difficult to get the bean counters regionally or internationally to give them a greater budget.
Right.
Okay.
So what we need to do is we have to make our lease very flexible. So maybe flexibility is the key, Jem.
But when we talk about flexibility, traditionally in Bangkok, we're on a 3-year lease cycle and everyone signs up for 3 years. But from what you said right at the beginning, Robert, was right now we're in this sort of phony war, if you like. We know there's oversupply coming, but nobody wants to cut their rents. So should tenants renew for 3 years, or should they renew for 1 year and say, I'll stay for 1 more year and wait and see? Or can they get a break clause in the 3-year lease? Is that possible?
Well,
is that a way forward to buy some time?
Yeah, we're going through this process ourselves right now. We've been open to moving to one of the the elite grade A buildings coming. They're not available yet. It's not particularly about rent sensitivity, but I don't think landlords will provide a 1 year break gap because they can see what's coming, and they know it's sort of there's no point giving that year. So they won't give a year, but they want pretty much a full rent, as if there's no drama coming down the road. But I've had what I would call bellwether anchor tenant status companies call and ask. Their cycle's the same as my lease is. Is this a fair deal? They really want to move to one of these more significant buildings. They're stuck for 3 years. I think people see themselves as being stuck for 3 years. I think from the tenant, really, we don't have a choice. I don't think the landlords will give 1 year. I think the smart move would be for the landlord existing landlords to preempt where it's headed in 3 years and strike a deal for 6 years that bridges the potential collapse in the marketplace, bridge that cycle by giving their tenants an impossibly good deal an unbelievably good deal, a deal they can't say no to right now, to bridge through the 5 to 6 years of this crisis. Will they do it? I doubt it. Perhaps some are listening to this now. I think they should. A lot of tenants will jump at it if that is offered. As Marcus said, there will be a flight to quality. That's what I was looking to do. Lots of tenants are looking to the flight to quality to One Bangkok and just Central Park. There's no denying those are the two. Premium addresses coming up. The smart landlords right now, stop that from happening. Because James, it's a phony war. Make it a hot war. Landlords can make their move now. The tenants will love them for it by a huge reduction in rent. They'll provide that longer term commitment. I see that as being the play available to progressively thinking landlords and tenants.
Just moving on slightly, is every new building says they're a grade A building. I mean, it's almost a default option when you write the brochure. And in office space, there seems to be, for a tenant, there are certain ways of actually measuring whether a building is a grade A building or not. And maybe there's some certifications, maybe you could just run through some of the, I think you touched on that on your STAR analysis. Maybe you could just spend a minute or so talking about what should tenants be looking for in terms of international certification rather than what their advertising agent wrote in the brochure.
Okay, right, James. We are all aware about the recognized global standard certification that prove quality of the building, such as leadership in energy and environmental design, or WELL certification. And I believe this certification, at least, they already have prerequisite what is the developer should do. So this is something that can also show or give the level of quality of the building, grade A, or the nourishment, air quality, everything is already inside there. So I think those certification would already help to screen. And as I mentioned, yes, my starting that's about technologies also can count that as well, or even something like we never seen before in many buildings in Bangkok. We've seen a few landlords that implement all the applications. This also something that we can also consider, touchless and everything, because those kind of things is considered one of the grade A standard, because at least they can they understand the need of occupier and they want to make a building better. And I can see that many landlords has now getting studying in LEED and WELL certification already. As I from our record, more than 400 buildings in Bangkok, almost 200 office building already registered and getting on their way to do these things, So.
Okay, but for LEED, there's various categories from memory, right? So probably gold and platinum. If you want grade A, that's what you want. And wellness, I don't know all that. But for tenants, what it means is that they can rely on some international certification rather than just what's written in the brochure. Would you agree that, Robert and Marcus?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that if a tenant's looking for grade A, and quite honestly, I really don't like grades of buildings. I think it's a disingenuous. I think yes, you have the top of the market, say top 20% is grade A, and I think that's really what if you're going to segregate it, is probably the rental and let the market determine what's grade A and what's not grade A, as opposed to subjective opinions on the fit and finish of a lobby. But there are sort of certain amenities which are important to individual corporates and other needs and requirements for a business organization. So I think it's important to understand what is it that is important to your firm, to your people. Where do your people live? How do they get to work? Ask those sorts of questions and then choose the right building for you regardless of whether it's grade A or prestige or anything like that. It's about finding the right home for your business for the next 10, 20 years, as opposed to having to look at moving every sort of 3 to 6 years or whatever rental site. Find the right place for the long term.
Thank you.
I would,
Now,
I, would
many of the
I didn't get to add
many
on
of-
that one. So very briefly, location still counts. The old adage of location in real estate is still very important. And Marcus is right on the premise that the Bangkok does not have a recognised centre of the town. We have lots of separate CBD general locations, and I think that allows for sub-districts all over the place with no recognised absolute centre. That may change, but ultimately the fit and finish, the glamour of a building will return, but I believe because of the new wave of supply coming online over the next 2 or 3 years will bring back a flight to the perception of quality. And for once, it will be in the prime location rather than the strangely suburban districts. That might start to see the resurgence of grade A. And then in particular, James, one of your LinkedIn posts just this week, you highlighted a map of Ceylon, where we have there this interesting collection of buildings within walking distance of each other, all redevelopments happening at broadly the same time. And you added later in the week Boonmit building to that list. I think we have four or five office buildings being built in the same place at the same time with good connectivity. I think that we'll start to see, in my view, that there will be a grade A zones will reappear.
Okay, and then the last question from me before I start to ask you the questions from our audience is, many of the members of the BCCT are SME tenants, and what recommendations do you have for them? I mean, if they decide that they're not going to be 100% work from home, should they go for a traditional office, 3-year lease to the fit out? Should they go for flex space, the serviced office? You know, despite all of the WeWork debacle and all the hype and bullshit that was involved, they're still around, as are many of the other serviced office providers, and some of them seem to be still growing. So what would your advice be, briefly, to if you're a small tenant, more of a startup, SME, micro company, and you don't want to work from home, what should you actually bother going and renting small office space, fitting it out, or go with other alternatives? Maybe Robert, just to briefly answer that one, maybe.
Right.
I think at this point in time, it's obvious that people should continue to keep their powder dry, keep it easy, keep the flexibility. Wait for the market, wait for the great reset into the Bangkok office market to take shape, to remold, before committing to a 3-year lease, which really needs to be 6 years. And the fit outs are not cheap; they're actually really expensive these days. The cost of infrastructure and IT. Stick to the being flexible in the short to medium term would be my recommendation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think we'll moving on to the questions that have being asked from the panel. I think Neil Russell asked if there was going to be options on flexible working. I think I hope we've answered that now for Neil. It seems agile working, certainly for many companies, is going to be the way forward. Tom Sorensen asked, will service offices like Regis benefit from people leaving traditional offices? I think the answer is yes, right, guys?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yes, agree. But James, the other aspect that we should also consider is that once all the SME, they are getting into the same, co-working area, they can also build the community, and also connection with the SME can also prove to be better of the growth of the companies, So I think that's another idea that we can get from the co-working spaces.
Okay, and one just summarising the questions from the audience. Harsh Seti asked, is the downtown Sukhumvit area office-based rental likely to go down in the near future in view of the pandemic, work from home, and people moving to satellite outskirts of Bangkok? I'm not sure we've seen people move to satellite outskirts of Bangkok. And what are what is likely rental charges for office grade A space in Sukhumvit area? I think that's a bit hard to call the rents, right?
It's difficult to give an actual prediction. I mean, I think it's safe to say that we all expect to see rental rates for maybe it's 15, 20, maybe more in terms of percentage fall. In terms of different areas of town are performing differently. So the areas like Asok and those areas, I think generally occupancy rates are relatively good still, whereas areas of the further field, Bangna and those things that I still have relatively higher occupancies, higher vacancies. So I think they're the ones which are probably going to feel the pinch a bit more.
Okay, I had a question from Paul saying everything would suggest that the lessee is in a strong position to negotiate with the lessor, but this may be a challenge with only a few main players on grade A properties. Apart from Kuncharan, I still think the market is quite fragmented. Would you agree on that? It's not like Hong Kong and Singapore where you've got top 3 landlords dominate the grade A office space. Do you think that's a fair comment?
I think it is. I think we are becoming, there is a dominant landlord you've just mentioned, and become increasingly dominant, and that could become a bit of a problem. But there are enough individually owned buildings scattered across all sectors that are going to be really struggling soon, that it should start to see rents drive down. And go back to the the question just before this one. All the points that the guy asking the question had, I don't think are the reasons why the market's going to change. It's the enormous volume of oversupply that's driving the change in the market. The pandemic itself was really potentially just a blip on the radar. It's the mountain of oversupply is changing the dynamic for the medium to long term. Yeah.
So I've got one more question coming in from Robert Troop. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Apologies if I didn't. In other geographies, we've seen a trend for landlords to provide the interior fit out for their tenants. Do you think that's going to happen in Bangkok?
It already has in some circumstances. Yeah, so I mean, not every building's doing it, but yeah, that has been offered by some properties. So it's about being able to be creative with the solutions when you're negotiating with the landlord. And I just want to sort of address and make a point whilst I'm on that. All these sort of creative solutions and ordered like getting leasehold improvement contributions, those sorts of things, you need time. And far too many tenants leave it far too late. They start worrying about their lease expiry with the last 6 months or with last year. Start preparing early. Give yourself plenty of time. Look at all your options. Review your space. Review your organisation. And when you have the time, then you've got more negotiating power because you've got the options which are available to you. So start planning early. That would be my major advice to SMEs and corporates of all sizes.
If I can jump in, and I haven't seen landlords offering fit outs, and I'm wondering whether get a lot interested to Rungrat, who are, let's face it, CBRE is huge. They conduct probably the majority share of relocations in recent years. Are you finding, are the grade A buildings providing fit out for tenants, or is this an oddity for just really struggling landlords, to Rungrat in particular?
Right, I think the landlords start to see that as the marketing tools as well, because some of you know that with this COVID situation, convincing some company to move is also not easy. So what they are trying to do is they will also consider the package that build out the fitting out for the tenant as well. You know what I mean?
Okay, so rentalisation of fit out. I mean,
Yes.
in my career, it was talked about, but when we actually got down to hard numbers, nobody could quite accept. The landlord's looking for a return on capital of maybe 10% on the fit out, and the tenants were it was higher than the tenants' cost of capital. So we could never match the numbers on that. So it was sort of a nice idea. And other markets which have, London, where you get capital contribution, the rental level in London is much higher than Bangkok. So it is possible to give a capital
It is.
contribution, but the rents are still relatively low here, right? So
It is, James.
it
But for the
seems quite a tough
occupier
one.
side, yeah, the occupier or the tenant also need to understand and have to sign the longer lease, like 6 years, so that the landlord is willing, to contribute that package.
Yeah, so it seemed to me that it's a nice idea in concept, but when you sit down and do the numbers, it's hard. And then the tenant wants particular customization, which the landlord can't reuse for someone else. It's not that they can only, they need to make their money back over the term of that tenant.
Yes, that's true.
Anyway, guys, but ladies and gentlemen, are there any more questions from the audience today? Can I just give you a couple of minutes if anyone wants to come in and ask anything else? Neil Russell raised his hand. I don't know what that means. He's raised his hand. I don't know where it's coming in. Where are we? Are you typing? I hope. Oh, it's coming in. I think. There's one more question while we're waiting for Neil from Kuntanyamon. Do you think there is still demand from overseas to set up an office in Thailand moving forward?
So I answer that. I think that there will always be new incoming companies because company growth globally of new industries and people growing within those sectors. So there are incoming startups. Just to put it in perspective on the retail side, there are lots of international retail brands yet to establish in Bangkok that are on their way. They will have head offices to support those units. So there'll be plenty of incoming tenants that unlikely to be in monster scale. These are more conservative setups, but they would want, on the most part, to be in grade A buildings. So I think that trend is still reasonably positive.
I mean, for the last 25 years, we keep talking about occasionally about, every 6 months somebody talks about regional headquarters being in Thailand. But it still seems to me that Singapore is the regional headquarters now that Hong Kong has locked itself up and the politics have changed there. I mean, realistically, for most companies, is Thailand going to be a regional headquarters?
Well, it is for some. It is for some already, right? So we especially in like on the manufacturing side. So I mean, for many, Thailand's still an important manufacturing base and will continue to be an important manufacturing base. And for those organisations, a regional operating headquarters here does make sense. So I think it very much depends on sector and individual organisation.
But
Okay,
as a
Neil,
percentage, it's nothing compared to, James, compared to Singapore or Hong Kong. It has been, and I would say it's unlikely to develop into a new thing in some way to mitigate the problem that we face.
Yeah.
Okay, so Neil's got 2 questions. We've got 2 hands, 2 questions. So do you see a move to other locations for back office staff? In other words, split your office between front end, back end, or even to the extreme of set up an office, back office in Phnom Penh and a sort of front office in Bangkok? Do you see people moving to multiple locations, or do you see the opposite happening with a consolidation of roofs, particularly with agile working, getting people all to work in one place?
If I could jump in, I think it hasn't really happened so far. So if you go through the 97 period to the 2008 period to the phase we're entering into now, from the observation I've had with the corporates I've spoken to, is one, the rents have never been high enough in the downtown to warrant the split office move, and then the availability of high quality suitable office space far enough away from the Bangkok centre does not exist, and the workers don't live particularly far outside Bangkok. I think if you look at where it works in the UK or Europe or the States, Australia, you're looking at more secondary cities. So I think if the Chonburi Pattaya area had made the effort 10 years ago to build office buildings and they had put the rail link in, then there might have been a chance. But the bottom line is, and we have looked at this as part of a research study a few years ago for the nearer eastern seaboard before Pattaya. And one of the conclusion is that no staff live in those areas, and you would just be putting people on the highways for hours every day, and therefore the answer is no, unless you consider the difference between, let's say, Wireless Road traveling up to Chengwapna to be a relevant distance. The geography is far enough away to count for that. It could do if the buildings were actually built, like North Park, for instance. So there has been some degree of it, but in terms of the expectation that we would see in more developed markets, no, and I personally don't really think it's coming.
Maybe I'll just sort of as a slight counterpoint. I mean, we have seen that to some extent, in especially firms who are conscious and sensitive to like disaster recovery. So if you have your head office on Ratchaprasong, that's where there's a real sort of focal hub where there's going to be a protest, if there's going to be disruption, civil unrest. That's usually going to be right in the very heart of the city. So having a disaster recovery location outside and further to the suburbs or elsewhere, that has been a solution for some firms, especially in finance and securities industries.
Yeah.
Largely, that's been a minority, right, Marcus? It's a very small percentage.
Not much, very small, but it does happen.
I'd say where this could happen is that a Mega Bangna development where it's sufficiently far away from town. It's a nice place. It's accessible by car. But if they really build the office buildings there, which that was in their master plan, they would have to make those rents significantly lower than the downtown rental. Whereas I would expect they would put it at exactly the same rent, and therefore it negates the purpose of decentral. Regrettably, they would make it not possible.
Yeah.
Allow me to jump in, James. Actually, I think it also depends on the nature or the type of business, because last 2-3 years we did quite a good size of deals that we have separate the teams, the back office, like call center, to the what we say the less developed area, just like in Bangna area, and also some even we moved to we call Chonburi, Harbour Mall, yeah, that area, and a few to Chiang Mai. Yeah, so
Okay, well, I think call centres are a very specific. It's an interesting subsector of the market, but it was really just call centre, not much on the rest of the back office, right? That was moving. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, I realise that we've overshot time, but not many people have dropped off, so they must be interested. Maybe I'll just make one last request. If there's anybody else that's got any questions, we've been going for 1 hour and 15 minutes, so I've overshot the sort of allocated time slot. But if there's anybody else, please, in the last minute, if you've got something, pop it in there. Don't see anything coming up. I think I'll probably call it a wrap today. So really, from me, a big thank you to all the panelists, to Robert, Marcus and Rurad, and to the British Chamber for organising this. I think we had at the peak 68 participants, which is, I think, one of our records for the BCCT Property and Infrastructure Group webinars this year. And for everyone that's still on the line, if you have any ideas about a topic you'd like to talk about, please let the British Chamber of Commerce know, and the Property and Infrastructure Group will try and find a speaker if they're willing to talk about that topic, so that we can maintain the relevance and usefulness for our members. Once again, big thank you to the panelists, big thank you for everyone attending today. Stay well, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and hopefully 2022 is maybe a little bit better than this year, but you never know.
Thank you. Stay safe, everyone. Bye-bye. สวัสดีค่ะ